Are you lost, Grandpa? The voice was sharp, laced with the kind of condescending patience reserved for children and the senile. Colonel Marcus Vance stood with his arms crossed, a perfect picture of modern military authority. His uniform was crisp, the digital camouflage pattern still factory fresh. His boots were polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights of the advanced training facility's ready room. He was young for his rank, a fast burner who had mastered the politics of promotion as skillfully as he had the digital battlefield simulations. Before him stood an old man who was the antithesis of everything Vance represented. The man was stooped, his shoulders curved by decades of gravity and burdens Vance could never comprehend. He wore a simple flannel shirt, faded blue jeans, and worn leather boots. His face was a roadmap of a long life, canyons etched around his pale blue eyes and a network of finer lines across his weathered skin. He did not seem intimidated. He did not seem anything at all. He simply stood, holding a long, cloth-wrapped object in his gnarled hands. "I was told to come here," the old man said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. Vance let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Told by who? The Historical Society? This is Range 7, a live-fire kinetic environment. We're certifying our new scout sniper teams on the Mark 22 advanced sniper rifle. This isn't a museum." The old man's eyes drifted past Vance, looking toward the reinforced doors that led to the shooting lanes. He could hear the distant, muffled crack of high-velocity rounds. "I have a request," the old man stated, not as a question, but as a simple fact. Vance's jaw tightened. The sheer audacity was infuriating. His men, the best marksmen in the 2nd Division, were running complex drills, their performance tracked by a dozen high-speed cameras and biometric sensors. Every second on this range cost the Marine Corps a fortune. And this relic, this ghost from a forgotten era, was wasting his time. "A request," Vance repeated, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Right. Let me guess. You want to see the new toys? Maybe get an autograph from a real Marine." The old man finally met his gaze. There was no anger in those pale eyes. There was only a profound stillness, a deep and unsettling calm that Vance found more irritating than any open defiance. "I need to use the 1,000-yard lane," the old man said. Silence. The NCOs and junior officers standing nearby, who had been trying to ignore the strange encounter, now openly stared. Vance felt a flush of hot anger creep up his neck. He was being made a fool of. "You need to what?" he said, his voice dangerously low. "You think you can just walk in here, a civilian, and request to use a restricted military firing range?" The old man shifted his weight, a barely perceptible movement. "I was given permission." "Permission? By whom?" Vance demanded, stepping closer. "The commandant himself?" "Right. You and the general, best pals, I'm sure." The old man offered no answer. He simply held the cloth-wrapped object. Vance's eyes narrowed, focusing on it. It was long, slender, and had an archaic shape. "What's in there, Grandpa?" Vance sneered, his arrogance blooming under the attention of his subordinates. "A magic wand. Your old hunting rifle." He reached out and flicked the cloth with his index finger. "You probably 3D printed it in your garage." The old man's expression did not change, but his grip on the object tightened. "This is not a toy," he said, his voice still quiet, yet carrying a new weight. "No, I'm sure it's not," Vance said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Let's see it. Let's see the cannon you plan to use on my 1,000-yard lane." Slowly, with deliberate care, the old man began to unwrap the bundle. The cloth was old oilskin, stained and worn thin in places. As it fell away, it revealed not a modern weapon of carbon fiber and polymer, but a rifle of wood and steel. The stock was dark walnut, scarred with countless nicks and scratches, each one a story. The barrel was long and blued, the finish worn to a soft gray near the receiver. It was a bolt-action rifle, an M1903 Springfield, a weapon that had been officially replaced before most of the men in the room had been born. Worse, it had no modern optics. None at all. It had only its original iron sights. A wave of derisive chuckles rippled through the assembled Marines. Vance felt a surge of vindication. The old man was clearly delusional. "You're joking," Vance said flatly. You want to shoot that at 1,000 yards? With iron sights? My men are using computerized scopes that calculate windage and drop in microseconds. You wouldn't even hit the backstop. The old man finished unwrapping the rifle and cradled it in his arms with a tenderness that was almost paternal. He ran a thumb over a small, silver pin embedded in the stock, just below the receiver. It was a strange little thing, shaped like a feather. Vance scoffed. Look, I've had enough of this. Sergeant, he barked at a nearby NCO. Escort this gentleman off the base, and make sure he doesn't get lost on his way to the retirement home. The sergeant, a burly man with a hesitant look in his eyes, took a step forward. But the old man spoke again, his voice cutting through the tension. The name is Kane. Silas Kane. General Maddox sent me. The words hung in the air. Vance felt a flicker of uncertainty, but quickly suppressed it. I don't care if the president sent you, he snapped. The rules are the rules. No unauthorized civilians. No unauthorized weapons. Especially not museum pieces. Now get out. He made a fatal mistake. He reached out, intending to grab the rifle, to take it from the old man and end this farce. His fingers brushed against the cold steel of the receiver. The moment his skin touched the metal, the world dissolved for Silas Kane. The fluorescent lights vanished. The smell of solvent and gunpowder was replaced by the stench of frozen mud and cordite. The polished concrete floor became a slick, icy trench wall. He was 20 years old again. The rifle, Wraith, was cold in his hands, its weight a familiar comfort against the screaming terror in his gut. Snow, thick and relentless, fell from a bruised purple sky. The screams of men, the chattering roar of machine guns, the crump of mortar fire. It was a symphony of hell. He remembered the cold, a living thing that burrowed into his bones, so deep he thought he'd never be warm again. He remembered the general, a young major back then, his face pale, pointing at a ridge nearly invisible through the blizzard. There's a spotter up there, son. He's directing artillery on our command post. If you don't take him out, we don't make it to morning. 1,000 yards. Maybe more. Through a blinding snowstorm. With iron sights. He remembered the feel of the trigger, the recoil that slammed into his shoulder, the impossible silence that followed as the enemy mortars suddenly stopped. He remembered finding the silver feather pin on the body of a fallen comrade, a good luck charm that had failed its owner, and pressing it into the stock of his rifle, a promise to never forget. The memory lasted only a second, but it was a lifetime. He blinked, and the sterile range-ready room snapped back into focus. Colonel Vance was still standing there, his hand hovering near the rifle, his face a mask of smug superiority. Silas looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not a colonel, but a child. A child playing with dangerous things he did not understand. Across the room, Gunnery Sergeant Reyes watched the entire exchange with a growing sense of dread. He was a man who trusted his gut, and his gut was screaming that the colonel was crossing a line he shouldn't. It wasn't just the disrespect to an elder, it was something else. It was the old man's stillness. Reyes had seen it before, in the quiet ones, the operators who had spent too long in the dark places of the world. It was a stillness born not of peace, but of containing a storm. And he saw the rifle. He didn't see a relic. He saw a tool that had been cared for with a devotion that bordered on religious. The wood was worn smooth by hands, not time. The steel was clean, perfectly oiled. Then he saw the name the old man had given. Silas Kane. It didn't ring a bell, but the other name did. General Maddox. David the Bull Maddox, the current Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps. A living legend. A man known for his ferocious temper and his unwavering loyalty to his Marines, past and present. Reyes knew, with absolute certainty, that no one dropped the Assistant Commandant's name lightly. While Vance continued his tirade, Reyes discreetly pulled out his phone. He didn't call the base command. He had a better number. He had the direct line to the general's personal aide, a master gunnery sergeant he'd served with in Fallujah. The phone was answered on the first ring. Master Guns, it's Reyes over at Quantico. Sorry to bother you, sir. What is it, Gunny? The general's in a briefing. The voice was clipped, annoyed. Sir, I have a situation here at Range 7, Reyes said, keeping his voice low. There's a civilian here. An old man. Colonel Vance is about to throw him out. And you're calling me why? Let the colonel handle his range. Reyes took a breath. The man's name is Silas Kane. He's carrying an old Springfield with a silver feather pinned to the stock. He says General Maddox sent him. Deafening silence. For 5 long seconds, Reyes thought the line had gone dead. He could hear muffled, frantic sounds in the background. A chair scraping, a door slamming open. Then the master gunnery sergeant's voice came back, and all the annoyance was gone. It was replaced by sheer, undiluted panic. Reyes, listen to me very carefully. The voice was a harsh, urgent whisper. Is the civilian still there? Affirmative, Master Guns. Do not, I repeat, do not let him leave. Stall the colonel. Do whatever you have to. If that man walks off this base, the general will personally burn Quantico to the ground and salt the earth. Do you understand me? Ah, yes, Master Guns. The general is on his way. ETA is 5 minutes. He's breaking every speed limit between here and the Pentagon. Just keep him there. The line went dead. Reyes looked up, his heart pounding. Colonel Vance had just physically placed his hand on the old man's shoulder. Time to go, old-timer, Vance said, trying to steer him toward the door. Silas did not move. He was rooted to the spot, an ancient oak against a summer wind. Reyes knew he had to act. Colonel, sir, he called out, his voice sharp and formal. Vance turned, his face a thundercloud of irritation. What is it, gunnery sergeant? Sir, there's a problem with the downrange target sensors on lane 4. We need your authorization to run a manual override. It was a lie, but it was the best he could come up with. Vance glared at him. Handle it, Gunny. That's what I pay you for. Sir, regulations state an officer of your rank must authorize it. A new security protocol, Reyes pressed, praying the colonel's obsession with rules would be his own undoing. Vance hesitated, torn between his desire to eject the old man and his ingrained adherence to protocol. It was in that moment of hesitation that the sound began. A low rumble from outside, growing rapidly louder. The distinct sound of multiple heavy vehicles approaching at high speed. The sound ended with the tortured squeal of tires on asphalt, right outside the ready room doors. Every head in the room turned. The doors burst open. It wasn't the general's aide or a security detail. It was the general himself. General David Maddox stood framed in the doorway, a 4-star titan of a man, his dress uniform immaculate. But his face was a mask of cold fury. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, swept the room, ignoring everyone until they landed on the old man and the colonel whose hand was still on his shoulder. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. General Maddox strode forward, his entourage of aides and security scrambling to keep up. He did not look at Colonel Vance. He did not acknowledge the salutes that snapped up around him. His entire world, his entire focus, was on the stooped figure in the flannel shirt. He walked with a terrifying purpose, a predator closing in on its target. Vance, seeing the 4 stars on the general's collar, paled and quickly removed his hand from Silas's shoulder, snapping to attention. Maddox didn't even glance at him. He stopped directly in front of Silas Kane. For a moment, the two men just looked at each other. The 4-star general and the unknown civilian. A silent conversation passed between them, a conversation that spanned 50 years of history and a bond forged in frozen hell. Then, in the stunned silence of the room, General David Maddox, Assistant Commandant of the United States Marine Corps, brought his hand up in the sharpest, most perfect salute of his storied career. His voice, when it came, was not a command. It was a prayer. It boomed through the ready room, thick with emotion and a reverence that bordered on worship. Mr. Kane, it is an honor, sir. Silas Kane gave a slow, small nod. David, you made good time. Maddox held his salute, his arm rigid, his gaze unwavering. Then he lowered his hand and turned, his eyes finally falling upon Colonel Vance. If his look towards Silas was one of reverence, his gaze upon Vance was one of pure, unadulterated wrath. Colonel, Maddox said, his voice dropping to a quiet, lethal register that was far more terrifying than any shout. General, sir, Vance stammered. Maddox ignored him, turning instead to address the entire room of wide-eyed Marines. You see this man? He thundered, pointing a finger at Silas. You see this man in his old clothes, with his old rifle? You probably see a relic, a nuisance, an inconvenience. He took a step, his eyes sweeping over the young snipers. Let me tell you who you are looking at. You are looking at a giant. You are looking at a legend you are not worthy of breathing the same air as. His voice swelled with a passion that silenced every rustle, every breath. This is Silas Kane. We called him the ghost of the Chosin Reservoir. In the winter of 1950, when my father's division was surrounded, outnumbered 10-1, and freezing to death, this man was out there. Alone. He gestured to the old Springfield rifle that Silas held. With that rifle, not some fancy rifle with a supercomputer scope. That rifle, with iron sights. In a blizzard. For 3 days, he held back an entire enemy regiment, appearing and disappearing like a phantom, taking out officers, radio men, and mortar crews from distances the laws of physics say are impossible. He stepped closer to Vance, his voice dropping again to that deadly whisper. The museum piece you mocked? Its name is Wraith, and it saved the lives of 3,000 Marines. This man was recommended for the Medal of Honor. He refused it. He refused every medal. He said he was just a rifleman doing his job. He asked for only one thing, to go home and be forgotten. Maddox turned back to Silas. He called me last week. His first time calling me in 20 years. He said his hands were starting to shake, that the memories were getting loud. He said he just wanted to feel the recoil one last time, to see if he could still make the shot. A simple request from a man to whom this entire corps owes an unpayable debt. The general's gaze swung back to Vance, and it was like the focusing of a laser. And you, he hissed. You, with your polished boots and your perfect record. You saw his age, and you mistook it for weakness. You saw his humility, and you mistook it for confusion. You disgraced your uniform by showing him less respect than you would a piece of faulty equipment. Vance stood frozen, his face ashen. The world had crumbled beneath his feet. You are an officer of Marines, Colonel. Your first duty is to the legacy of those who came before you. A legacy written in blood and sacrifice by men like him. And you failed. You failed utterly. The silence that followed was absolute. Into that silence, Silas Kane's quiet voice emerged. He had stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on the general's rigid arm. He's a young man, David, Silas said softly. He's learning. We were all young once. The grace of the gesture was a physical blow to Vance. It was worse than any punishment. It was forgiveness he had not earned. Maddox looked at Silas, and the fury in his eyes softened, replaced by a deep, abiding affection. He nodded slowly. But his duty was not done. He looked at Vance. You and every Marine under your command here today will report to the base historian tomorrow at 0600. You will begin a new, mandatory course of instruction. It will be called the Kane Protocol. You will learn the stories of the men whose shoulders you stand on. You will learn them until you can recite them in your sleep. And you will learn the meaning of humility. Is that understood, Colonel? Yes, General, Vance whispered, his voice cracking. Now, Maddox said, his voice returning to normal, clear the 1,000-yard lane. Mr. Kane has a request to fulfill. Months later, Colonel Vance was in the base library, studying a dusty volume on the Korean War. He was a different man. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet intensity. He had been humbled, but not broken. He had, as Silas predicted, learned. He looked up as the library door opened, and his breath caught in his throat. Silas Kane walked in, moving slowly toward the history section. Vance stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked over, his heart pounding. He stood before the old man and came to a position of attention. Mr. Kane, he said, his voice clear and steady. Sir, I wanted to apologize. Sincerely. For my conduct. Silas looked up at him, a faint, knowing smile touching his lips. He studied the young officer's face, seeing the change that had taken root there. He simply nodded. The uniform doesn't make the man, son, Silas said, his voice a quiet rasp. The man makes the uniform. He then turned and pulled a book from the shelf, leaving Colonel Vance standing there with a lesson that would define the rest of his career and the rest of his life.